We all think we know why the US dollar rules the world. Military power, the size of the American economy, maybe the petrodollar. But what if I told you that none of these are the real reason? What if the true power behind the dollar, the mechanism that decides which nations survive a crisis and which ones collapse, is something almost no one outside of finance has ever heard of? A secret network quietly maintained by the Federal Reserve, a tool that governments worldwide depend on, a tool so powerful that, without it, global trade would freeze, banks would fall, and entire nations could go dark overnight. This secret tool is called swap lines, and today, we're going to uncover what they really are, how they keep the global system alive, and why the entire world economy depends on something that was never meant to exist. Before we unravel the mystery of swap lines, we need to understand the world the dollar created. After World War II, something unusual happened. Unlike every empire before it, the United States didn't conquer nations with armies, it conquered them with money. The dollar became the global reserve currency, the unit that priced oil, gold, trade, debt, and commodities. But there was a flaw. If the world uses dollars for everything, the world also needs dollars for everything. And that demand meant one thing. Whenever the global economy shook, countries scrambled for dollars the same way people scramble for food in a famine. But the US didn't want to just print cash and hand it out. That would be too obvious, too political, too dangerous. So instead, the Federal Reserve created a backdoor mechanism, a quiet pipeline connecting America's central bank to the central banks of select nations around the world. A mechanism that could create billions, even trillions of dollars out of thin air, and send them directly to foreign governments without Congress ever voting on it. This pipeline is the swap line network. To uncover where swap lines came from, we go back to the 1960s. The dollar system was still young. Global trade was expanding, but there was a problem. European nations needed dollars to buy American goods, and they didn't have enough. Every time demand spiked, interest rates surged, currencies wobbled, and the entire global system shook. The solution? In 1962, the Federal Reserve quietly announced the world's first swap line, a deal with the Bank of France. The mechanism was simple. The Fed swapped dollars for French francs temporarily. France got the dollars it desperately needed to stabilize its markets. The Fed received francs as collateral. No politics, no public debate, just a central banks exchanging currencies behind closed doors. It was meant to be a tool for emergencies. But like many things in finance, a temporary fix quickly became a permanent dependency. Swap lines expanded across Europe, then to Japan, then Canada, then to every major financial hub tied into the dollar system. Still, nobody talked about them. They were technical, obscure, and buried deep in monetary reports that only academics read. But then came the moment that exposed how powerful swap lines really were. In 2008, the global financial system was collapsing. Banks were failing. Trade was freezing. Every market in the world was desperate for one thing: US dollars. Not euros, not yen, not yuan, dollars. Why? Because almost every international trade contract, every shipping invoice, every global loan was denominated in dollars. Countries weren't just dealing with a financial crisis, they were dealing with a dollar shortage. And this is the moment swap lines went from obscure to essential. The Federal Reserve opened the floodgates, not to American banks, but to central banks around the world. In just a few months, the Fed provided over $580 billion in dollar liquidity to foreign nations, quietly, instantly, without congressional approval. For many countries, this wasn't support, it was survival. Europe needed dollars to save its banks. Japan needed dollars to keep trade moving. South Korea, Brazil, Mexico, all needed emergency access to US currency. Swap lines became the global financial equivalent of a hospital ventilator. If you had one, you could breathe. If you didn't, you suffocated. But this raised a disturbing question. Who gets a swap line, and who gets left behind? When the world realized how powerful swap lines were, another truth emerged. They are not available to everyone. The Federal Reserve has permanent swap lines with a small, exclusive group of countries. Europe, United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Switzerland, Australia. These are America's closest financial allies. Everyone else, they must hope for temporary access if they get it at all. This creates a two-tier global system. Tier 1, nations with unlimited access to dollars. Tier 2, nations forced to survive on their own. This is where the hidden power behind the dollar becomes visible. The United States chooses which economies remain stable and which ones face crisis, not through invasions, not through sanctions, but through the simple act of opening or closing. a financial pipeline, and nothing exposes this more than the crisis that came next. In March 2020, global markets collapsed once again, not because of banks, but because of lockdowns. The world economy froze almost instantly. Demand for dollars surged at a level never seen before in history. Companies needed dollars to pay foreign debts. Banks needed dollars to conduct international trade. Governments needed dollars to stabilize their currencies. Within days, the global financial system was starving for US currency, and once again, the Federal Reserve stepped in. But this time, the scale was even bigger. The Fed opened swap lines, providing over $450 billion to foreign central banks in just a few weeks. At one point, Europe alone was borrowing over $300 billion from the Fed's swap line facility. Quietly, secretly, invisibly, the United States became the world's lender of last resort. And this raises a question. If the world economy collapses without dollar swap lines, who really controls the global financial system? Every few years someone announces the rise of a dollar alternative. The euro will replace the dollar. China's yuan will replace the dollar. BRICS will create a new currency. Bitcoin will end the system entirely. But here's what every alternative lacks: swap lines. The dollar system works because the Federal Reserve can act as the global backstop during emergencies. China doesn't want to provide liquidity to other nations in a crisis. The European Central Bank can barely stabilize its own region. BRICS nations don't trust each other enough to back each other's debts. Crypto has no lender of last resort and collapses under stress. Without swap lines, no currency can become the global reserve. This is why the dollar remains dominant. Not because of politics, not because of military power, but because of a secret network that keeps global finance alive. In moments of panic, a network that no other economy is willing or able to replicate. But here's where the story turns. Because we are now living in a time when the global system is facing pressures like never before. Global debt recently passed $315 trillion. Over 90 countries face currency stress. US interest rates have created a global dollar squeeze. Developing nations owe more dollar-denominated debt than ever. This creates the perfect environment for another worldwide dollar shortage. And when the shortage hits, swap lines determine everything. Countries with access will survive. Countries without access will see their currencies collapse, their markets crash, and their central banks scramble for dollars in the open market. Often, at devastating exchange rates, the cracks are already appearing. Turkey, Argentina, Egypt, Pakistan, Nigeria, Ghana, all facing brutal dollar shortages, all excluded from permanent swap lines, all struggling to keep their currencies alive. The financial map of the world is starting to divide sharply between those with the dollar lifeline and those without it, and the consequences will shape the next decade of global power. So here is the truth most people never hear. Swap lines are not just a financial tool. They are the foundation of the modern global order. They decide who gets liquidity in a crisis. They determine the stability of currencies. They protect the economies of US allies. They reinforce American influence without firing a single shot. Swap lines are the real backbone of dollar dominance, a hidden architecture of power built deep inside the financial system, and the more the world depends on them, the harder it becomes to imagine a world without the dollar. Before we close, here are 3 takeaways that summarize the hidden power behind the dollar. Takeaway 1. The dollar dominates because it can rescue the world. Every global crisis creates a dollar shortage. Only the Federal Reserve can supply unlimited dollars. That makes the US the default stabilizer of the world economy. Takeaway 2. Swap lines decide financial winners and losers. Nations with swap lines survive crises. Nations without swap lines face currency collapses and deep recessions. This creates a 2-tier system of global financial privilege. Takeaway 3. No other currency can replace the dollar without swap lines. It's not about GDP. It's not about trade. It's about liquidity, support in emergencies. And no other country or currency offers that. The world economy today is more interconnected, more fragile, and more dependent on US dollars than ever before. Every debt, every trade deal, every banking system, all tied to the same currency. And while swap lines keep the system alive, they also expose a dark truth. If the dollar sneezes, the world still catches a financial flu. And if the Federal Reserve ever decides to tighten access or change the rules, the entire global system could shift overnight. The question is not, will the dollar collapse? The real question is, what happens to the world when it faces another crisis and the swap line lifeline is no longer enough? If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories that shape our world economy. And if you want to understand the next piece of the financial puzzle, How global debt became a ticking time bomb. Watch the video on your screen right now. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and stay prepared.